Hey there, welcome. My name is Jessica Buchanan, and I'm a New York Times bestselling author, professional speaker, and founder of Soul Speak Press, a non-traditional publishing company created for women who've been through something, now they know something, and they can teach us something. In Her Words is a podcast designed to support aspiring memoir authors on their writing and publishing journey. It's hard work, this writing and publishing stuff, and I want to empower you with encouragement and information so you can keep sharing your truth. So grab your coffee, your notebook, find a quiet space, and let's dive in. Well, hey there, welcome back to In Her Words. I'm so excited to have a different kind of guest with us today. I'm always very excited with all of our guests when I don't have to sit here and talk to myself for 30 minutes. But today we're talking to Becky Ellis, who is a published author, and I've just learned has extensive experience in the publishing world. And she's here to tell us a little bit about her memoir and her publishing experience and what it's like to market and sell a book. Becky, thanks so much for coming on and joining me today.
Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate being here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I think it's going to be great. Why don't you start with, after what you said, 20 plus years in the publishing industry,
Right.
Why'd you decide to write a memoir?
Oh, that's a great question because I went into the process with my eyes wide open about what publishing is. And my memoir came about because my father was a combat sergeant in World War II. And he never talked about it, although he had a lot of trauma. And my family experienced that trauma and have our own because of it. And when he was 89, he came to my home where I live in Portland, Oregon, and asked if I had any issues to clear up with him. And just a brief background, my father fathered 8 children, had 4 wives, never told anybody anything, any of his reasons for anything. And I had a lot of issues, but I wanted to know about the war. And he opened up and told me about his war experience. And once I heard his experience, it didn't take an hour. It took years for him to get it all out. And I thought, this is a story I have to tell. There is not a lot written about the child's experience, the generational impact of war. There's not a lot about that. There's a lot of glorified war stories. There are a lot of horrible war stories, but there's not a lot about what happens to the family when the soldier comes home. And that's the story I knew I needed to tell. That's why I wrote the book, because I thought I had a unique story that needed to be told. I've heard you say memoir is a form of activism, and it is definitely my form of activism. Is I think silence is not golden. Silence separates us. Stories bring us together and conversations connect us. And my activism is to get people talking about the thing that they're not talking about.
Yes.
All families have it. All families are talking about something.
Yes.
And it's hurting us. It's separating us. And we're in a loneliness epidemic, and people need to start talking about the real stuff. So that's why. It's this thing inside me. It's my activism and my passion. It's not an intellectual, rational decision to publish a memoir.
Right. I mean, I think that is the bottom line for everybody, right? Like, memoir doesn't make sense. Memoir is hard to sell in the traditional space. It's deeply personal. It's so vulnerable. But you just described your why, right?
Yes.
Like that purpose that you get up with every morning and get on another podcast interview or go to another book reading and signing or send another batch of emails out or whatever, that is what drives us, right? And I get that in my own way. What a beautiful, beautiful story. So did you reach resolution with your father?
Oh, resolution's a great word. I haven't been asked that. I've been asked if I reached closure, and resolution, I would say so. I reached understanding with him, and that was the gift. Is I finally understood who he was without all my expectations and desires for who I wanted or needed him to be. And when I was able to do that, I could really see him for who he was. And that gave me deep understanding for him, deep empathy for him and what he'd been through, and also understanding and empathy for myself. Because in seeing what he'd been through, I could see what I'd been through, if that makes sense. Like I could see why he replaced women and children like he replaced cars, is because on the battlefield, his unit was replaced 3 times. He had a 300% casualty rate in his battalion. And that's huge. That's a lot of trauma. That's a lot of emotional disconnection. So I did reach a deep understanding. And I think that's what we can do when we start to really listen and have deep conversations with one another, is understand each other's experience.
Would you use the word interchangeably for understanding to knowing? Did you feel then that you knew your father?
I think I could know him the best that I could.
Yeah.
You know, I'm still learning to know myself. So,
well, which is a great like pivot, because I think a lot of people write memoir in order to heal themselves in some way that feels tangible and meaningful. Maybe perhaps then to heal a relationship.
Yeah. It's a deeply therapeutic process. And I think it's a deeply transformative process if you're willing to go the distance. And dig to the deepest places.
Because it is hard and scary and it hurts like hell.
Super hard. And in doing that, I needed, a mentor and a coach who knew memoir really well to push me to those deep places, to say, oh, this is nice, but go deeper. Go back and ask your father this. Like, ooh, I don't know if I want to ask him that, but
we don't need to know that. Can't we just cut that part out?
So after I started hearing his story, I started writing the memoir, and with such a gift, he lived another 7 years after he started talking. He passed away at 96, which was only 3 years ago. And I was well into the process. So I could, during the process, go back and ask questions and dig deeper with him.
And how did he feel about the fact that you were writing?
At first, he said, do not use my name. I don't want this talked about. And I thought I was being really sly recording him on my iPhone, because I'm like, he's old. He doesn't know how to use his phone. He gets confused about it all the time. He's always asking for help with his darn phone. And so I would push record and turn it over. And, after a while, after maybe a year or 2, he said, are you recording this? This is important. This goes in a book,
Oh, interesting.
So, and at the end of his life, he kept saying, is our book published? Is our book published? And although my father, I worked in publishing for 25 years, he clearly did not understand the publishing process.
As most people don't.
Right. So, so he felt really good about it. He thought it was really important once he told his story, and he had a lot of fear. He saw Nazi occupation. He saw what happened when people told their stories or said who they were. So he carried that fear his entire life. So, but he let go of that because he knew it was such an important story to be told, and people needed to know what happened when combat guys come home. And people need to know what happens to their families. I say that military service is not a few years of service. It's a lifetime of sacrifice. These kids that join, they don't know what they're getting themselves into. They don't know they're trading a normal life for a life they can't even imagine.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I don't have firsthand experience, but I'm very heavily connected to the military community based on, why I'm still alive today.
Yes.
And also my brother is a retired Green Beret. So, that rings so true and resonates so much from the stories that I've heard and the conversations that I've had. I'm like, oh my gosh, well, we'll get to that at the end, but I'm like, I'm going to Amazon this to my brother. I'm going to Amazon it to my dad. Like, I mean, just what a beautiful contribution. So I'd love to pivot a little bit and let's talk a little bit about your background in publishing and where you're at today and what you're doing and what it's like.
Yeah. So I'll start from the beginning. Is when I was a little child, I had terrible eyesight. So I didn't learn to read for a long time until my parents figured out I needed glasses. But my brother read all the time and it annoyed me because I wanted him to play. And he always had his nose buried in a book. It's kind of, I think, how he escaped trauma, was to escape into another world and another story. And I wanted him in this world with me. So I hated books and reading. But when I got to college, I fell in love with stories and with books, and I knew I wanted to work with books in some capacity. I thought I wanted to write one, but I thought, I don't have enough life experience to write a book. So, right out of college, I got into the publishing business and I started working for a publishing distributor in San Diego, which was a great entrance into the business because I got to work with a lot of different publishers and really get a national scope on the business. And from that experience, I ended up being a cookbook buyer at the distributor. And I learned all about the cookbook industry. And I thought, the publisher I want to work for, I sort of handpicked. I'm like, oh, I want to go work for Sunset, because it was this beautiful, they would invite us up for publishing meetings, and they had the most beautiful business offices, and they weren't even really business offices, but the most beautiful offices in Menlo Park, California.
Oh,
And they
wow.
had a wine cellar and test kitchens and an entertainment patio and test gardens and the whole thing. So I got a job there.
Amazing.
Excuse me. Yeah, I got a job there and I worked there for over 20 years. It was a fantastic company, and they are part of Time Inc.
Uh-huh.
So I worked for brands like Southern Living, Cooking Lights,
Yeah.
Sunset, Coastal Living, lots of magazine brands, but
Yeah.
I always worked for the book division.
Okay.
So I headed up their marketing department for a long time, and I did national account sales. So
Wow.
I know all about book distribution, book sales, and
Yeah.
book marketing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
So
my background. Over
amazing.
20 years in it. However, I left in 2014 before social media really caught on and started to have a big influence, or not really. I mean, even publishers today will say, I have no idea how much social media can impact. They really don't know. So
So
everything
why
I
then
hear, they
are
don't
they
know.
so why is it seemingly that publishers like that's the end all be all is the audience that you're bringing to the table? Or is it?
I think that might have to do with publisher by publisher, and the information I get, which is very current as of last week, is we don't really know what works, because if they knew what worked, they would give their writers a formula. Do exactly this. And there is no formula for writers to go out and do this. I think they need to know that you have a platform. And
Okay.
whether that platform is in newsletter, the thing I keep hearing is build a newsletter list, because you own the list.
Yep.
They are loyal to you. If they're not unsubscribing, that I think is the most powerful piece of it, is
Okay.
build that. Now, when I was in publishing, I worked for branded books who
Mhm.
they weren't really authored, and we did all of the work. And
Mhm.
I know now authors are doing most of the heavy lifting in promoting and marketing their books. So
Okay.
it's a real change in the industry that I've seen in my, now it's been 30 years since I've been in it.
Right.
35.
Well, I think it's a big change even from when my book came out in 2013.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I was working hard, I was hustling. We were all over the place, but we also had I'm saying me and my husband because we co-authored this book together. We had incredible opportunities. I mean, we did go on a media tour. Like we were on Dr. Phil, we were on the Today Show, we were on um Anderson Cooper, like I mean all of the things, right? Um I don't hear a whole lot of that anymore.
That's happening now for celebrities.
Celebrities.
Celebrity memoir.
Yeah.
If you're a celebrity, that's going to happen for you.
Yeah.
And I'm
Otherwise
talking
you have
about
to pay
Sally
like,
Fields and
yeah,
Prince Harry,
in Ina Garden or something like that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that So I have a friend who just published, his book came out in like maybe September or whatever. And he traditionally published, and he was constantly asking me questions about marketing because they had a marketing team. Um, and all I saw was a few like local channel news spots. And I was like, oh, that's a bummer. Like that's not
It's
going to move the needle.
so competitive now. Even if you hire a huge, I wanted, my story is so important to me, like to my activism. I hired top-notch publicists out of New York. They got very little traction. It was very expensive.
Oh, I'm so
And they
sorry.
got almost nothing for
Oh,
me.
so sorry.
And
That's always the risk, right? You
they were
don't know.
practically crying about it. They
Yeah.
love the story, and
Yeah.
it's so noisy out there, and it
Yeah.
really takes the author's boots on the ground to know your audience and to keep getting out there. And it's exhausting, but if
Yeah.
you are passionate about your story and the reason you're putting it out in the world, I think that's what gets me up in the morning.
Yeah.
I spoke to a veterans group yesterday, which there were about 50 guys there, most of them Vietnam vets, and they're a tough group because these are Bush Marines from Vietnam.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
But and I got up in the morning and it was so beautiful where I live. The rain had stopped. I was like, I don't know if I want to do this today, but I put
Yeah.
on my author,
Yeah.
uniform, and I went to the event and I loved it. It was so life-giving to me to go talk to these guys.
Mhm.
And that's what's required,
Yeah. Yeah.
that is what is required.
You're absolutely right. And I'm just so grateful to hear another author say that. Right.
Yeah.
And especially someone who has been traditionally published, because I think that oftentimes really important stories don't get published through the traditional method, and then authors shy away from the non-traditional method because they think it's going to be too much work. And I'm like, it's going to be work either way. You pay on the front end or you pay on the back end. Either way, you're going to pay.
Yes.
And so, yes, you have to be connected to your why, to your purpose. So I'd love for you, if you wouldn't mind, giving us a few like tangible examples of things that you have done to promote and sell and market your book, because I think that could be really helpful to our listeners.
So I have not said no to anything.
Mm.
And I think starting a newsletter is really important. Start it now, even if you only have 3 people on it,
Okay.
and DM everybody figure out what your activism is, figure out what you want. That took me a while to figure out. In fact, it took me talking to readers to figure that out. They kept asking me, how do you have these difficult conversations, Becky? How do you have those? How did you get your father to talk to you? And I thought, oh, this is what people want to know from me. So figure out what that thing is, and then create your newsletter around it, and DM everybody. One night I turned on, some Netflix show, and I started Facebook messaging and DMing everybody on my list. Would you like to join my newsletter? It's about the messy, complicated, sometimes funny conversations we have. And I write about that every month. And everybody said yes, except one person who's like, how do I know you? I said, I don't know, but you friend requested me.
But love that.
So immediately I had like 150 people.
Amazing.
And
Yeah.
because of that, I have a really high open rate. It's like 89% or something. And these are details. But so do the newsletter. Figure out. It's hard to say, this is what I want, but do it and keep at it. Make it sustainable, I think. And then put yourself out there. And it's so hard for writers because most of us are introverts.
Yep.
It was my publicist who actually suggested, get your tribe together. You need a launch tribe.
Yep.
And so
that's our method here. That's our method here. Yep.
And my launch tribe was amazing.
Yeah.
And there is someone in my launch tribe who has books in the back of his car. He's my partner, actually. And he hands them out to everybody he sees. And he was in because you never know
Yeah.
where your connection's going to come from. He was
Yeah.
in this little tiny town in Oregon at a pub, and there was a woman that came in selling wreaths for veterans. And he said, I'll buy one, and you need to see this book, and she set me up with coming to this mental health fair that was very small. Again, I didn't want to go. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon, but I went and I sat in a tent in the rain. And the person in my same booth with me was the VA suicide crisis line. So I connected with them. They connected me with these other people.
Yeah.
This is how it goes, right?
Yes.
And it
Yes.
takes a while.
It takes a while. It takes a
Yes.
long time. It's the big picture. It's the long game. That's what I'm always trying to stress to my authors, because the book will launch and it'll come out and they've hit bestseller status on Amazon or something. And, they sold all these copies in the first 24 hours. And then they're like, okay. And I'm like, okay. And go take a nap and then come back, because now the next part of your work begins.
Yes.
And we try to prepare them for it, but it's like kind of, it goes in one ear and out the other,
Yeah. And, and I know people have big ideas and great hope.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that maybe we need to hold that belief in order to keep writing and to decide.
Tell me more about that. Break that down for me.
Well, people think I'm going to be on the New York Times bestseller list, or I'm going to write a book adjacent essay and it's going to go viral. I think that we need it. It takes so much stamina to write memoir. And I think, like I said, most memoirists are introverts. And I don't think that we are narcissists. And it feels sometimes like such a narcissistic act to keep putting your story out there. And it's so counterintuitive. And I think we need to hold the belief that we're doing something for a higher purpose and that it's going to be valued. Yeah. And in that value, it will work. People will see it. And I needed that belief to keep me going.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And the reality is maybe you're going to change 100 lives, and that's enough. Maybe you're going to change 3. And can that be enough?
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
instead of 1 million. Right.
Right. Right. I know we get so caught up in metrics.
We do.
Yeah.
We do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're living in a moment in time. Right. And we have to keep perspective on who we are in the history of the universe.
Yeah. And I think all we can do is what we can do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
So what's been the hardest thing about all of this, aside from, how long did it take you to write the book?
It took 10 years from the time my father started talking about it to, he started talking in 2014 to the time my book came out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you hear that, everybody? 10 years.
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was your writing practice like during those 10 years?
I wrote every morning for 4 hours. I had to.
Gosh, that's amazing.
I had to carve out the time. I would say 4 days a week, every morning for 4 hours, because I had at that time kids. Now they are all in college. Most of them have graduated at this point. If you look at it in the scope of my life, it's like, wow, I had middle schoolers when I started this process.
Well, and again, if you want it, you can do it. Like I'm up in really early in the morning to do, I'm my spiritual practice. I write every day, Julia Cameron's morning pages, right? Every day for 20 years, I've been doing that. And people tell me, well, I've got kids or, a job or whatever. And I'm like, so do I. So you, like we all do. It's again, it comes back to that why. What's your purpose? What's your mission?
Exactly.
And it is the driving force. What's hard about it now?
Keeping going, still saying yes, because it's tiring. I'm a little bit tired of talking about my story. It's refreshing to come and talk about publishing because, like I said, I don't think memoirists are narcissists, and going and telling my story feels somewhat
self-indulgent.
Yes. Thank you. Self-indulgent.
Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think memoirists get such a bad rap for that?
Because we're telling our story, because it's a truth. I know fiction writers don't get a bad rap
No,
for that.
and I'm always like, are you kidding me? Anybody can sit there and come up with some make-believe story. The things we're writing about are true and they actually happened.
Right.
And we
Right.
survived it. Like
Yes.
that's the story. But
Well, I think memoir is about survival,
mm,
right? Most
yes.
memoir is about survival.
Mhm.
And one developmental editor I had one, and she said to me, she happened to be an editor at the Big Five for a very long time. And I got her at a time when she was leaving that to start agenting. It was like an in between moment. It was such a gift to have her because she's so brilliant. And she said that people read memoir, adults read memoir the way children read fairy tales, as psychological practice. And most of the practice is survival. And I believe that's true.
Very
So I
profound.
say, look at your, TBR pile and see what you're practicing. What are you practicing? It's always
Mhm.
a question I ask myself when I look what's in my pile.
So what are you practicing right now?
I think I'm still practicing survival.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm practicing not resilience, but not giving up. I'm
Yeah.
practicing not giving up.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
I'm practicing getting up and continuing to move forth and continuing to tell my story. That's what I'm
Right.
practicing.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, consistency, right?
Consistency and endurance is what I am
Endurance.
practicing.
Yes, I
Mhm.
can see that. I think endurance is the word that memoirists need to write in big red letters and put right above their computer screens because it's a marathon.
Mhm. It is. And I coach memoirists, and I always end with keep going.
Mhm.
Like you have to keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, what are some of your, okay, keep going. What's another recommendation or tip or a piece of advice you would give someone who feels that they have a story worth sharing, but they're feeling all the things, right? They're feeling hesitant, they're feeling self-conscious, they're wondering if everybody's going to think they're like just a big narcissistic meathead. Like
Mhm.
what would you tell them?
I would say put your story down on paper, find a supportive writing group, find a mentor, and get some feedback,
Mhm.
because I think that we have a hard time putting our lived experience on paper. We fill in the gaps of what we know, and sometimes our stories make sense and sometimes they don't. And I have never been in a writing group where someone has said, that's so boring. Our
Mhm.
lives are so interesting, and we all have a common experience, but we all have unique experience as well. And I think stories are fascinating and they do connect us. I
Mhm.
am such a believer in storytelling. One of the things I do is I work with a group called Right Around Portland, and they facilitate writing groups in unheard communities. So they go to houseless shelters and disability centers and recovery centers and prisons and that kind of thing, and facilitate writing groups in those places. And our stories need to be heard, you know, and it's tremendous what comes out. I receive so much from that experience. The stories that come out are tremendous, and
Yeah.
everybody has a story
Yes.
to tell.
Everybody does have a story to tell. I
Mhm.
wholeheartedly connect with that and I tether myself to that truth. You
And
know,
I think, yeah, the memoirists are the people that believe in storytelling enough to take the time out of their life to put it on paper and help somebody else survive their own experience.
yeah, it reminds me of that quote that oh shoot, now that I'm trying to think of it, I can't think of it. Um your story could be a page in someone else's survival guide,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And I know how desperate I was for stories when I was in the deepest parts of my trauma recovery. There are not a whole lot of stories out there that resonated with me. until I read this book called Surviving Survival. And it was actually a little bit more research based, but it was full of memoir type stories of survivors. And the whole point was to shed light on how difficult it is for survivors to survive the aftermath of the trauma and what that's like. And I felt so seen for the first time in like 5 years since my kidnapping experience, because I was like, oh, I finally have a word for what this is.
Yeah.
And then I was voracious. I read it, I listened to it. I still have memories of I have a loop that I walk, like walking and running that loop. My kids were just babies, and I would just cry because I was like, okay, this person survived a shark attack, and this person survived, almost being murdered by their partner. Like, I can survive this too. I can get through this too. And it was that book more than the therapy. And then I started writing.
Right. And that's such a beautiful thing, is that author will probably never know
No. No, I've
how
tried to find him. I've tried to
deeply.
track him down to tell him I feel like he saved my life, but I can't find him anywhere.
Yeah, and that's, putting our work out in the world. The Portland Book Festival was last weekend and I was invited, and it was such a thrill because I'd gone as a reader for 20
Yeah.
years, and then I was there as a writer and did a reading, and someone came up to me afterwards and said, I didn't know you wrote a book. I read your short story about the washer and the dryer. And this is a 750 word short story that got published in the Northwest Review, which is a tiny literary review in the Northwest. And I said, "Oh, that's so interesting. How did you find the story?" She said it was taught in a class. And I was shocked. I was dumbfounded,
Yeah.
honestly. And I realized we don't know what happens to our work once we put it out in the world. We don't know what good it's doing, but we have to believe it's doing good. And that is a beautiful story about one particular book that changed your life. And
Mhm.
I looked everywhere for stories about what is life like for daughters of combat
Mhm.
soldiers.
Mhm.
I found one, and her dad was a Vietnam vet. And it's called Falling Through the Earth, which is a beautiful book, but it wasn't the same experience I had.
Yeah.
And I needed more. I craved more. I've watched so many World War II movies, and because I wanted to know my dad,
Yeah.
and none of them taught me much at all about my father. A
Mhm.
couple of them taught me about how horrible it might have been, but
Yeah.
I didn't the book wasn't out there that I needed to read.
Mhm.
So,
And so if we can't find it, then we write it.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Which
Mhm.
we full-heartedly believe at Soul Speak Press. And now I feel more than ever at this where we're, and I never get political, but I will just say that our stories matter more than ever. Our
Thank
women's
you.
voices need to be elevated now more than ever. They need to be supported and held up and with big huge megaphones. And so however I can do that here at Soul Speak Press, I'm going to continue doing it. I'm so grateful that you spent 10 years learning your father, and then you made such a beautiful contribution that we could take part in. And what's the name of the book, and where can people find it?
It's called Little Avalanches, and you can find it at Amazon and Barnes and Noble, wherever books are sold, really. And I will say, I also believe that women's voices are so powerful and important. And writing about the war, one of the challenges I've had is that the voice of women and children is strikingly absent from the war narrative.
Yeah.
And that is also a reason I wrote the book, is to lift up the woman and child's experience in the war narrative.
Yeah.
So they are important. And I appreciate the work you're doing with that and supporting women and raising their voices. So thank you so much for that.
Where can our listeners connect with you?
BeckyEllis.net. There's a page called Connection. They can email me or join my newsletter, which I already talked about.
Yes,
And
join the newsletter. I'm gonna hop on and join it as soon as I Amazon those books. So Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
your time, and thank you just for such an authentic conversation. I'm deeply appreciative.
Yes, thank you too. I appreciate it. Nice way to start the day.
In Her Words is hosted by me, Jessica Buchanan, and is produced by Soul Speak Press, a non-traditional publishing house for women who are ready to tell their story. If you would like to know more about our submission process, I encourage you to check us out at www.soulspeakpress.com or follow us over on Instagram at soulspeakpress. We appreciate all your questions, and if you would like to leave us a review, we would be so grateful.